Hello, I am Michael Gaucher, and it is February 4th, 2025. And today we're going to talk about C++ development on Linux using the GTKMM framework, GTKMM4 and Linux. In the previous video, somebody had a question about the desktop environment that I'm using, and I want to explore that a little bit here. Linux environments come in many shapes and sizes. This layout is called Gnome Classic, and I pointed out because I got a good compliment on it in the previous video. One of the commenters, they said this desktop looks very clean, and I agree. It's one of the reasons why I choose it. I like this approach. I would rather this whole bar be down here so it would be even more familiar, but I actually think this works well, and so everything is in place. I can click on various folder shortcuts and I am where I need to be in an instant, and I can set up favorites so that I have the most commonly used applications here available to me. Is to bring the state-of-the-art into reality, to achieve the highest in refinement, quality, design, and balance, to make the highest quality a reality. A blank window becomes a barcode scanner. The software application that we've been building, it come from very humble beginnings. So I started out with a basic window. So it's just a plain window, not much going on here. You can resize it, all that great stuff. But that is the starting point when you adopt these graphical user interface frameworks. You start with your basic window, right? When you're building desktop applications, it starts with the windows. And then we went on from there to the basic barcode scanning, right? So that whenever there is a barcode that needs to be scanned, it can be scanned right here. The data for that looks like this. I started out with some very basic barcodes, and I pretty much just moved on from there. And as you can see, it's very, very rudimentary, but that's how you start. Is you start out very, very simple, and you build your way up, right? So that was great. And then we moved on to a version that was able to do a little bit more, and it's able to accumulate barcodes, and for that I generated more test data. And best is not always perfect, but best simply means that you put all of your effort into making sure that it has the highest quality, that it is reliable, that it is stable, and that it holds up over the longest course of time. So today we're going to build a complete desktop GUI in C++. This complete desktop GUI has a menu and it has a configuration screen. This will be the start of a process of a very full-fledged software application that deals with barcodes, inventory, and warehouse management. And so those concepts from a business standpoint is simply a way of focusing our ability to create a good C++ application as a desktop application in the Linux environment. The previous video I go into the 3 of 9 barcode and different barcode formats and fonts and how to set that up. And with this, I'm able to get better scans, right? And as I showed in the previous video, as I scan barcodes up to 10, I'm able to accumulate them into containers. And in doing so, it allows the barcode scanning activity to be more organized. A universal tech platform allows you to increase your reach so that you have more choices and more possibilities when developing your solutions and when adapting them to new circumstances, scenarios, and situations. So you want to be able to write your software in such a way where when you expand it and you add new features, that it's much more straightforward and less of a hassle to do so. So we're using an object-oriented approach here that is going to allow us to expand out various parts of the software. I developed a vision around this type of solution, and so these are the three basic versions that we have in this process so far. So far, so good. And then, we have all the source code in this directory, and the directory is formatted according to Linux and Unix standards. So you have your configure AC file, right? So this basically allows the entire project to get configured into a software program. So those software programs that I ran, this file here is the starting point in terms of getting everything together so that that program, all the code that was written, can get translated into an actual program. So this is the starting point, the configure file. Configure AC, it stands for automatic configuration, and it's part of Auto Tools. So I explained that in more detail in the previous videos, and then of course you have makefile.am, and I've made some modifications since the last video where I've added some more source code files to the template. This template, when it is executed, it gets translated into this larger file, this larger make file. So just over 1,000 lines long, right? So we have actually gone from 24 lines, and the Auto Tools program, it translates that into over 1,000 lines of instructions. So then we have our source code, right? So these are all the source code files for the program, and I've made some modifications since then where the previous versions, it was just app :create, right? And so we had that type of situation going on, and now we have expanded it out to creating an instance of what is called a Gaucher application. And so this is a Gaucher application here, right? And what this does is it allows us to extend the application so that if it needs to do more complex things, we're not putting all that complexity here in our main method, although this will grow as the program grows, but we can control the way that growth appears in the program through these abstractions. And of course we talked about the barcode record and how each barcode that's scanned is accumulated into here. And now we have the main window, right? And so the main window, which I'm going to talk about at more detail in this discussion, has a few aspects to it since the time that we last spoke on this particular topic. Clean technology. I first heard about this idea from a Dr. Wesley Muhammad. He described the idea of clean technology. And it is technology that doesn't take too much away from you, if anything, and it gives you many benefits in nourishment, health, wellness, and that applies to software development because all too often there are trade-offs that we've made commercially with some of our technology. And this is a process that we're talking about here that underneath it has certain philosophical aspects that works towards the long-term viability of the technology that is being built. Clarify the design of a program, especially a GUI program, than to write it on paper. Yes, we can use whiteboards on a computer and we can use other tools like that, but there's something about writing it on paper, drawing it out on paper, that etches it more indelibly on the mind. And so that's what this process is. I want to share with you a design that I had worked on, And this design is very simple. It's very straightforward, and it's a way of putting thoughts together so that you can chart the course for how your program will evolve in terms of the user interface. The process starts by visualizing your idea on paper, and you just draw it out. Very simple, just regular lines, and it helps you to take all the ideas that you have in your mind, your brain, and your insight, and just put it out in the most direct way possible without any other constraints. You just take a pen or pencil and paper, and you put together your concepts, you scribble them out, and then later on you can refine it by doodling it up in a graphics design program. When you remain steady in a process, despite the challenges, despite the hurdles and difficulties, that is where you are able to make breakthroughs. You can consider this next part to be the heart of this entire discussion, this entire video. So this took me a considerable amount of time in my world, where this entire application, this entire software program, for me, it's very easy to build. But there was one little feature here that I wanted to put in that I admired from other software that I see on Linux, and I didn't realize how difficult this would be. And it's not that the doing was the difficulty, but I will explain. The configuration window. So I have this configuration window, right? And this configuration window is how the overall scanning is configured, how it is set up. And it's something that I wanted to put in place, but I wanted to put it in place a certain kind of way. The window was very straightforward to build and to set up, and I am quite pleased with how that went. I also set up what I call a configuration record. And so the configuration record basically is it's a bundle, it's a message, right? It's a message bundle that's going to get passed back and forth between the main window and the configuration window, right? And so this is how they communicate with each other. So the configuration changes that are made in the configuration window, they are captured in this configuration record that's sent back to the main window. And then if the configuration window is opened subsequent times, then the last configuration that was defined would be repopulated into the configuration window. So that way everything remains consistent across activations of the configuration window. So it's a very simple design, and it's very straightforward in how that's going to work. But one thing I wanted to do is run this program and show you what this looks like. So let's go ahead and run this program. Now, this is the program. I've already built it, right? And you know, this is how it looks. I added 2 buttons. I have a menu, and then when I click configure, there's the configuration window, right? So this is what I have been able to put together since the last time that we discussed. But it's that concept of time that I want to take a moment to talk about. So one of the things that I found interesting was when I was going through this and I was putting this together, you might find this funny. Some of you might find this funny. And this is the real point of this discussion today, is this right here. You see all of this? This right here is what generates that menu that you saw, and that took me 4 to 5 days to set up. See how simple that looks? It looks very simple, but it took 4 to 5 days to set up. And there is a very particular reason why it took 4 to 5 days to set that up. So in the programming with GTKMM4, which is based off of the website of the same name, right? Chapter 15 talks about menus. And in chapter 15, it describes all the steps that you need to go through to set up a menu. The menus typically look like this. So if you have a program like, let's say you have a program like GIMP. So in a program like GIMP, you have a menu like that going across. That's all fine. The program that we're building here does not have that requirement. A simple menu like this, where things are just consolidated, and it fits a more modern type of sleek design. This does not cover that to quite that extent, but this setup is called a header bar. So let's search for header bar and see if there's any hits on that. So we do have a few hits on that, right? But you will start to notice something. Header bar is never described in code. It's not described in C++ code. Instead, it's described in what you might want to call a declarative code. In this case, declaratively declared in XML, which is fine if you want to operate that way, but I find UIs to be more consistent when you decide to build with the API, the user interface API directly. That gives you much more flexibility, much more sophistication and finesse in how you build the UI and how you activate and present that UI. So anyway, and again, like I say, it's fine to do this if you want, but if you want to do this using just actual C++ code, there are no directions in the GTKMM, and I would dare say GTK regular documentation on how to do that. So I had to figure that out myself. So I'm going to show you how I went about figuring it out. Previously I explained the difficulties of this process, but let's go into this with a little bit more depth as we come out of it with a solution that will show us some insights in the software development practice that we can use globally in how we build software. Loaded GTKMM 4.8 because that's the version of GTKMM that I'm using on this system. And so I got the source code for GTKMM. It's open source, so I went through the source code and I was interested in demos. And demos is not already built. It's just source code. So all of these files here, I had to invoke the make file to have these files generated. But once it was generated, then I could run the demo program. And I found header bar, right? And I said, oh, okay, yeah, that's roughly what I'm looking for. Because the first couple of times that I tried to set up the header bar myself in code, what I ended up with was all of this was wiped out. And all I had was this. I didn't have a minimize, maximize, or close button. It was like, wow, that's not going to work. That's not going to work at all. So I said, okay, maybe I can get insight from a GTKMM standpoint by simply looking at how they do it. Let's see how the professionals do it. So I look at the source code for this, and I go in here and I'm sitting and I'm saying, okay, I see a couple of things here. I see a couple of things that I could try, but in reality, none of this actually works. None of this actually works. There is, or let me put it this way: when I ran the application, right? So this is the software. When I ran this, I was able to generate this menu the first time around, but these were grayed out. You could not click on them. It was grayed out. So it was like, what in the world am I doing wrong, right? So So it was just one of those situations. So I looked at this and I couldn't find any insights in any of this at all. So, but it did turn out that this right here is very important. Pack start and pack end. That is going to basically preserve whatever is already here. So if you already have a title up here and a minimize, maximize, and close button, it is the pack start and the pack end sequence that's going to preserve that. So that was what was useful about that, but it didn't solve the problem of being able to have a header that could be used, right? And so then I said, okay, let me look at gedit, because I use gedit all the time. It has a menu, and certainly there's some insights there. So I went through the source code for gedit, right? Not line by line, but I looked for very specific uses of GTK header. I found them, and I looked at them, and they were no more revelatory than anything. Same with DevHelp, because I'm using DevHelp for documentation, but DevHelp, the source code for DevHelp was no help. So then I moved on to just doubling down on the GTK information, right? Because when we look at the documentation for the menu, one of the things that it tells us, it talks about actions, right? So when you click on an item, that's going to trigger an action. So let me find chapter 15. So yes, actions, or in this case, simple actions. They're accrued into a simple action group. So I went and I did all the research through the actual code, through the code documentation. I looked at action group. I studied the API in detail. I looked at the description, and I didn't really see much insights here. I found some insight in this documentation where it, at some point in this documentation, when it talked about setting up these actions. So anytime you have an operation in a menu, it is affiliated with an action. So in this case, let's say the action new. So let's say file new, file open, program quit, right? You set up an action for that, and you bind a actual method off of a class or maybe a free function. Anyway, so you bind that to a signal, right? And so GTKMM has it set up where it all gets affiliated with a simple action group. The documentation said that, this documentation said that if you have an application window, right, which this is, then you can call add action without having to set up a simple action group, because application windows already have application groups. And that is also reinforced in the documentation, right? So when you look in the documentation for application window, right, and it talks about action groups, then it basically talks about that. So I went all around the world. I looked at everything and anything. I looked at popovers. I had issues with popovers. So just know that when you are setting up a menu model, depending on how you set up the menu model, then the documentation for a menu. So you're setting up what's called an actual menu or a menu model, because this here with the 3 stripes, that is a menu button. So you can set a menu model on a menu button, but when you set the menu model on the menu button, that will set the underlying popover to a null pointer. So it basically gets rid of the default popover. So you got to substitute in your own popover in order to get that working the way you want. So anyway, I thought maybe I had an issue with the way I was doing the popover or the way I was doing the menu model. So long story short, it really came down to I was originally just doing this. I thought I could just set up, the action any way I want, right? So when I set this up, I thought I could just do this. It would just be fine, see? And I could just bind them that way. Oh no, you can't do that. You can't do that at all. So my clue after 4 days is when I read through this and I just realized, because you know how your mind works. When you're in software development, you go through different pieces of information and your brain is putting it all together. And I looked at more references than just this, right? I was going through here and I was looking at not just action group, but I was looking at simple action group, and I was expanding these out to see if there was some insights here, right? Anything, because it was going beyond 2 days, and it was like, wow, this is taking quite a bit of time, and there were other things that I wanted to do, but I wanted to make sure I got this done the way I wanted to and not give up, because I could have given up. So instead of giving up, I just said, okay, let me just read this and read this and read this, because the source code from GTKMM didn't have any answers. This documentation is valuable, but for this particular situation, it didn't have any answers. So if I was going to pull this off and do it right, I had to figure this out myself. There was nobody I could call. I did use AI. AI didn't know the answer. And I only gave AI like 10 minutes on it, right? Because I know how it is with AI. You could end up working with AI for 4 hours and still get nowhere. So I wasn't going to go down that road. I was like, okay, DeepSeek, couldn't figure it out. OpenAI ChatGPT couldn't figure it out. So it's like, okay, I gave them each 20 minutes, 30 minutes to work through this. And I was like, nope, next. Let's just figure this out. So I went and I just read this, and I read this line, and I said, Windows-specific actions are prefixed with win. Application-wide actions are prefixed with app. So even though I have a application window, the menu is in the context of this window, not in the context of the application. So going through and doing add action, without this, right, no dice. So about sometime yesterday, I put it all together. I figured it out. I had that eureka moment. I was so excited. And I said, okay, let me just go ahead and create this, because I avoided doing this line. I avoided this for like 4 days. It's like, hey, it's already built in. Let's just make it smooth. It all will just flow in and all that. That didn't work. So I said, let me just go ahead and create this. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, it's my last ditch effort. If this doesn't work, then it's totally over. So I created this, or I declared this header actions, and I invoked the static create method off the simple action group. So then I added the actions. I had already had some form of this, right? So if I just delete this off, it will compile, right? But it's adding it to the default action group that is part of the application window from which this derives, right? So anyway, and there's probably a workaround there where you can still do this and then perhaps retrieve the default action group off of the window and operate accordingly. But even with all of that, that's still not going to do you any good if you don't get this part right. You have to prefix this with win dot. And then when you insert your action group, you have to make sure that the actual group name is win, right? So once you do these pieces, do this part and this part together the right way, then everything flows. And then the menu that I was talking about, this is no longer grayed out, and you can actually use it accordingly, right? So that's cool. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and build this fresh. Let's go ahead and delete this. Oh, look, the program's gone. Where's the program? It is totally gone. Well, that's okay. We'll just build it fresh. So the way you do that, you just go back into the actual code directory. So you got to configure, and that is going to generate the requisite build files. And so now they're built, and now you have a make file. So this is the make file. When this file is ran, it's going to run all these instructions. Well, it's going to run 98% of them. It's not going to do any of the install instructions, right? So anyway, it's just going to do check. But anyway, so let's go ahead and build the program. So notice the program itself is not here. You have to build it. So let's go ahead and build it, compile it. And so here are all the instructions for that. And these are all the instructions you would have had to written by hand, which is not a bad idea. You should know how to do this by hand, but this automates that. So so you can double click on this, right? So you can double click on this just like this. But when you're in development, it's actually best to do this, because when you do it like this, any diagnostic messages that this can put out to the console, you'll be able to access here. So that's a good debugging method to engage, right? So that's how this configuration window is going to work. And then I wanted to do it this way because it's fancy, right? I just want to make it fancy. That's all. And then, once these barcodes are scanned, right? Let me scan a couple. Got a couple of duplicates in here. So let's see. There we go. So I got a container's worth, right? So let's say I have all these containers. I've accumulated all these containers. So then what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to export it, right? So I want to be able to click export, and export doesn't do anything but write out to the console, right? But I want to be able to export it out to either a tab delimited file or an XML file or an EDI 856 file. Right, so that is the big picture on that. And then I got these buttons here. Once I write the code for these, where if you scan something, you saw this. You saw how long it took to actually get correction on that. So that I want to be able to just click erase. So let's say I scan that again. So if I scan it again, see, it's a duplicate, so it's not going to allow that to go back into the sequence. But let's say I have some other issue here. I want to be able to click reset and just erase it. I mean, you can hit the backspace key. I mean, that's obvious. But sometimes it's just helpful to have a button where you can just say, let's just erase whatever's in that field, and we're good to go. And then let's say you have gone along and you started, let's see, let's say you just started scanning a couple of items. Right, and you say, I just want to start over. I don't want this sequence of serial numbers or whatever it is you're scanning. Click erase all, and it'll just erase all of that, so you can start over on that scanning sequence without affecting your other containers. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with all of that, right? And so that's pretty much what we have there. And this program here, this is going to become the latest in those programs that we had earlier, our different versions. Make a copy of that. See where we had that. It can now join the club. So that is our 4th version, subversion, and but those are all the main points with that. And as it relates to this code here, right? Getting this header was a very important win for me. It was difficult. It seems simple, but it's just getting all the right pieces together. Hopefully this video serves as documentation to someone who may have struggled with this and would be able to work through that. And you can see where I have the configuration in place. So when I clicked on that button to open, the configure window, when I click that, right, this is actually what runs. It instantiates a new window, sets up a signal, right? So when the window is closed, so when I click this X, right, then this is what runs, which the purpose is to delete the window that was instantiated in memory, right? And so you also have to set transient 4. If you don't do that, then the window will be all over the place and all this kind of stuff. I wanted it centered, and this the word "this" establishes this main window as the parent window for this configuration window that's being brought out. And then set modal true. That means that you can't click into the main window while the configuration window is active. And notice I'm passing in the configuration data, right? I'm passing in the configuration data. So the main window has the configuration data, and the configuration window changes the configuration data. So when I show the configuration window, it's going to have the configuration data. Then when you exit out of that configuration window, it passes back, or we grab back the configuration data, we update the configuration data. And that is used already. I've already modified the application to use it. So there's the configuration data, and I'm using one of the properties off of it. Get the items per container, which is going to be the limit, right? I have it defaulted to 10, right? But when you run it, you might change the items per container to another value like 20 or something like that, right? And so once I implement that, then that's going to be part of this and other validation aspects as well. The challenges and the temptations to bow out early. It is good that we endured and that we persevered, because perfection, and perfection in the philosophical sense, not the real sense, but perfection, that higher level of excellence, makes it worth it in the end when we accomplish our goal. Let's get ready for the future and look at a few areas that we might improve on in the future as we get ready for the next iteration. I have to set up the configuration window. Like I said, that's really the last piece of this, is to get that set up and do some final touches on the main window, and then it would be a complete application at that point. I may add a database, an SQLite database. I've been thinking about that, but the way the program is right now, it doesn't really need that. You can drive everything off of export files in terms of how it would relate to downstream processes. So it would just be the initial input in a downstream process, and then you would use data integrations with ERP or you name it in order to make this work. You may have like QuickBooks, or you might have, whatever. The export file is all you would need. So after 25 years of software development, I have seen the very simplistic and you might call compressed and consolidated, no nonsense focused ways of doing this, where you don't need an elaborate architecture, you don't need an elaborate or super decked out type of thing in order to make this work. And so anyway, that's what that's going to look like. And then of course, over the course of time, maybe in the next couple of days, as I wrap up the implementation of this functionality, I'm also going to put some nice visuals on it. I'm going to soup it up, trick it out, and make it look really nice. Lessons and takeaways that we have received from this process. Some things that we can understand as we navigate the levels of order, the maze of structure and proper protocol and invocation of API. Let's see what some of those lessons are as we go through this process. We arrive at the point of wisdom from this process. What can we learn in terms of the key lessons? And the key lessons that I look at is documentation and build processes, which I will relate here shortly. One of the things that we can take away from this process and this experience is the vital importance of self-reliance and confidence, and to really explore every avenue that you can. But that even when some of the easiest references are available and they still come up short, you have to really tap in and say that, okay, this is software. And software always has a process to it. And no matter how much abstraction you get, like we saw with the XML UI files, that has to translate into software code at some level. And you have to see what that is. But you also have to really understand the documentation and read through it at a deep level, and that will help considerably. But it also points out that even in the year 2025, documentation is still not where we all would like it to be, and that we need to be mindful of that, but not let either the absence of documentation or documentation that does not align with the ideal way we would want to do a process deter us or block us from what we are ultimately trying to achieve when we put a software program together. So that's one aspect of that. The other aspect is that build processes are evolving. We have tools like CMake, we have tools like Meson, MESON, but at some fundamental level, they all work according to the makefile system, right? Or they interact with that on some level. And so facility and proficiency with invoking makefiles and working with them can get you out of a jam, as it did here with me, and being able to successfully compile the GTK demos. So you have to know these tools at a foundational basic level, because all the sophisticated, refined, and elaborate ways of doing things that you see in demos and see in code bases, they're all fine and good, but none of that takes you anywhere if something falls apart and you have to go deep to the core to really understand something. So that is the wisdom insights today that we can take forward as we build better software solutions now and into the future. Part of what we have built here and sought to establish is a form of premeditated efficiency. Not so much premature optimization, the way that Dr. Donald Knuth spoke about, but premeditated efficiency in the process itself, right? So we want a software result that is not overly complicated, not overly dense, one that has a very straightforward structure, a very straightforward way of engaging with it, but also one that operates within an ecosystem, in this case the Linux ecosystem and the open source ecosystem, where it is much more efficient in terms of how software runs, how it is managed, and how it is maintained and propagated over time. Eventually, we will have quantum computers and quantum artificial intelligence, and it would be an amazing era and age to develop software using those tools. But as it stands in 2025, the tools we have available as far as artificial intelligence cannot do the process that I just showed in this this discussion in this video. But we should still use those tools, but realize that the marketing and corporate propaganda about AI replacing software developers is not a reality. And we should not be encouraged to lay down our skills, lay down our tools, and lay down our practices just because we think that it's going to be irrelevant. As we see in this process, I did not expect it to go this way, but it was reflective unto myself to show me firsthand that yes, AI is a great tool when it is able to answer certain kinds of questions, but there are questions in the way that we build software that AI cannot answer. And while you're at it, like, share, and subscribe this. I will see you in the comments, and I will see you later.